Good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome once again, Valley Beth Shalom, live and online. It's Shabbos morning, and it's time for Torah study. This morning, once again, I am privileged to welcome my two friends and teachers, Rabbi Sherre Hirsch of the American Jewish University, and Rabbi Marc Gellman, who tonight is on the road. Today is on the road in Aspen, Colorado.
Hey, partner. Hey,
Time as a bank robber in Aspen, Colorado. Good to see you, Marc. Good to see you, Sherre. Thank you for joining this morning. This morning we are reaching the end stages of the book of Bamidbar. We're reaching the end of the journey. The journey is coming to its conclusion. We're coming close to the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. And the issues that the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, presents to us as we reach the boundaries are going to be the issues that's going to dominate the concern of the Bible for the rest of its corpus. And frankly, it's going to dominate the concern of the Jewish people for the rest of history. We don't live in a desert. In a desert, we have no neighbors. In a desert, there is no influence from outside. We're all by ourselves. We're isolated. And we're able to concentrate fully on the internal cultural conversation. But once we approach the civilized world, that is the boundaries of Eretz Canaan or wherever we find ourselves living, we live in a society that we share with numbers of other cultures. Somebody's phone. Here we go. That's what I mean, you see? Other cultures calling. We live in a place with other cultures. And the question is, how does Israelite religion in the Bible and how does Judaism fare when it's an environment of exchange with other cultures? This is a very familiar conversation for those of us who live in a pluralistic American society. And it's always been part of the conversation, most especially in modernity, but always been part of the Jewish conversation. And the story that we're going to reach here in Bamidbar is the story of this, that's the wrong one. It's the story of this moment. There we go. This moment in the life of the Israelite people. And here's the story. When Israel was, this is in the book of Bamidbar, when Israel was staying in Shittim, that is the area just outside of the boundaries. They profaned themselves by, and the word is whoring, because the Hebrew is zanut. It was engaging in a kind of a spiritual adultery with the Moabite women who invited the people to sacrifice to their god. So the image here is a sexual image, but it's referring to spiritual infidelity. The people partook of them and worshipped, and Israel attached themselves to Baal Peor, that is the god of the Moabites at this place. And the Lord was incensed, and the Lord said to Moses, take the ringleaders and publicly impale them so that the Lord's wrath may turn away from Israel. So Moses said to the Israelite officials, each of you slay those of his men who attach themselves to Baal Peor. Just then, one of the Israelites came and brought a Midianite woman over to his companions in the sight of Moses and the whole of Israelite community, who were weeping at the entrance tent of meeting. So we have a man and a woman representing the spiritual infidelity of the whole populace. And what we'll find out later down over here is that the name of the man was Zimri, son of Salu, who was a chieftain of the Simon of the tribe of Shimon. And the name of the woman was Cosbi bat Zur, who was the daughter of an ancestral leader, of a chieftain of the people of Midian. So this is more than just a personal sexual liaison. This is a treaty. This is a political liaison, a political agreement, a political covenant between one of the tribes of Israel and one of the tribes of the land. And the problem is that this is going to schlep the Israelites into the cultural milieu of the Midianite and the Moabite peoples. Just then, and here's the event, when Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the Kohen, so Pinchas is the grandson of Aaron, he's the son of Eleazar, who is the chief high priest of the people of Israel, saw this, he left the assembly, and taking a spear in his hand, he followed the Israelite into the chamber and stabbed both of them, the Israelite and the woman, through the belly. It's an act of vigilante justice, as it were, vigilante revenge. And the plague against Israel was checked, and those who died of the plague numbered 24,000. And this is the beginning of that was the end of last week's Torah portion. Here's the beginning of this week's Torah portion. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, Pinchas the son of Elazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from Israelites by displaying among them his passion for me. He's a zealot. He is a passionate man. So I didn't wipe out the Israelites. Therefore, grant him, and the Hebrew is Brit Shalom. Brit Shalom, a covenant of peace, a covenant of wholeness. It's translated here as a pact of friendship, shall be for him and his descendants after him, for a pact of priesthood for all time. He is rewarded, as it were, for this act of zealotry by saving the people, by killing these two people. Now, one tiny little fact about the story, which I think adds one more dimension, and then I'd like to ask our friends for their reflections on this story. You remember that way back in the book of Genesis, there was a moment when a woman named Dinah, who was the daughter of Jacob, was raped or seduced by the leaders of the town called Shechem, by the prince of the town called Shechem. And her two brothers, who were Shimon and Levi, went and slaughtered all the men of the town, and were castigated by their father Jacob for making them odious, for making them obnoxious in the eyes of the people of the land. Well, it's ironic now that we get to the end of the Torah's story, and we have this boy, Zimri, who is the son of the chief of Shimon, being slaughtered by Pinchas, who is the descendant of Levi. That is, the violence of these two families comes back to haunt them. Here's the great question that the Meforshim ask, and we need to reflect on as well. Did he do the right thing? Did Pinchas do the right thing? Did he do the godly thing? Was he being praised by the tradition with this Brit Shalom, or is he being in some ways either quietly or overtly condemned? And the bigger issue is there a place for passionate zealotry in a religious community? Is there a place for passionate zealotry in a civil community? Sherre, you want to start? Give us your reflections.
Actually, I've been on vacation, so it's nice to actually just listen. I was sort of like taken with your Torah, and it's so nice to see you both, Rabbi Feinstein, Rabbi Gellman. I actually want to let Rabbi Gellman speak first because I have a lot of thoughts on it, but I want to hear your take and then respond.
Okay, so I think there's two great dangers to every living religious tradition, and frankly to every culture. The same thing, because religions evolve cultures. And those two dangers are on the edges of the religion. On the one hand, there is the danger of heresy. And on the other hand, there's the danger of zealotry. Now, heresy is believing too little in the principles of the faith or the culture, and zealotry is believing too much. Both are threats. Now, in the case of Pinchas, of course, we have the example of the zealot. Now, what Pinchas did was wrong on two levels. First, it was procedurally wrong. And the sages, the rabbis in the Midrashim, have a field day with this and a very big difficulty with it. And that was that he didn't convene a court and charge Kozi and Zimri. Well, he charged Zimri. He didn't charge him. He didn't bring charges. He didn't bring it to the judges, and he just killed him on his own. And so it was an extra juridical act, and that's a problem. The second problem for me with this zealotry and with all zealotry is that it transforms the individual zealot into a prophet, someone who defines the religion by their rage. And the only way to define a healthy religion is by people who are not enraged. There is the teaching of the Buddha that the only way wrath can be conquered is through non-wrath. And Gandhi's teaching and Martin Luther King's teaching, and I identify with that very strongly because I grew up in the 60s when I was proud of my rage, and I thought this was a sacred rage against the war and against America. And now I'm ashamed of that in many deep and important only distorts the moral compass we have within us. And in terms of heresy, we can talk about that another time. But for now, zealotry is an ever-present danger. And the question that I have, and I would want your response to, is there a mechanism within a healthy religious tradition to protect against zealotry?
I was going to ask the opposite question, which is there a place for healthy zealotry in a healthy religion? And is there any place for zealotry? Because, and I can't believe I'm asking this question, but there's a part of me that extremism is included in the Torah because it gets our attention. And like all zealotry, it gets our attention. The 9,999 cars that go by on the freeway safely each day, or each minute, I should say, they're not newsworthy. But the crash, the extreme case is the one that gets our attention. And this is the extreme crazy case. And the fact that the rabbis let it slide is the question that it's trying to encourage us to see where zealotry can fit and how do we manage it and regulate it, or so that we keep our eyes open? Or is it saying there's no place for this, but we let this particular one slide? I don't know. I'm always toward Pinchas. It slays me. No pun intended.
I don't think the rabbis let him slide. I think the rabbis actually accuse him. It's one of the very remarkable places where I think the rabbis come down against the pshat of the Torah. The pshat of the Torah is that he's rewarded because he stops the plague. He's done God's work in purifying the people Israel, even if it takes an act of vigilante murder. But the rabbis come down the other way by saying, look, there should have been you have a juridical procedure for doing this sort of thing. You don't go off and just vigilante, Dirty Harry, blow these people away, make my day. That's not the way that you do things. However, so the rabbis, I think that the rabbis, because they're trying to tame the passions of the community, and they've had a hard time. I mean, think about the rabbis with their own cultural place. They watched a bunch of zealots destroy Jerusalem. The rabbis wanted to make peace with the Romans. It was the zealots who prosecuted the war against the Romans and lost Jerusalem. The real question is this: can you ever have social change without some quality of zealotry? Can you ever have anything move from the status quo to a new sort of status quo, from the status quo ante, from where we are now to what we become accustomed to what we're used to a new social arrangement, without having somebody a little insane, a little spiritually insane? And
Eddie, you phrased that perfectly. Like, can you have that with one person not leading the charge that's a little off the edge, right? Or an event that's a little off the edge? Marc, you're on mute.
You got to unmute yourself, Gellman. There you go.
Okay. So I'm on the other side of that. I mean, 1 billion Hindus in India were freed from British control by Gandhi, who was not a zealot. And the civil rights movement in America succeeded. The Civil Rights Act of 64 and 65, they succeeded because the movement was led by a man who was not a zealot. And in fact, as soon as he was assassinated, as soon as the movement was taken over by zealots, the movement failed.
But how do you define zealot? A person that's so committed to their cause that they will go to any lengths to achieve it. Some of these people that you're claiming, maybe they didn't kill someone, but they were definitely zealots.
No, I disagree. I think the idea of Malcolm X, by any means necessary was exactly the idea the king rejected. That was precisely why he succeeded, because he wanted to create a movement of whites and blacks, of people of good heart and good spirit who were opposed to injustice and opposed to discrimination. Zealotry is always a false god because it leads to violence, and violence is a false god. Now you might ask, could we have had an independent America with a nonviolent, or Gandhi's advice in the Holocaust, which was so difficult and perhaps wrong, certainly wrong, that Jews shouldn't have resisted the Holocaust but gone in mass demonstrations? That's a very difficult question. But I think the idea of praising zealotry on any level, of saying, well, at least they really were committed to something, I think it's a false hope, and I think it's a trap. I think what really develops cultures are reasoned people, people who are prepared to compromise, people who are prepared to keep their values in mind, but who are not prepared, which is the central part of zealotry, to demonize the opponent. That's the fault of zealotry. That's its fundamental sin, that it demonizes your opponent. It doesn't see any sanctity in them. You can run them through with a spear through the belly because all you care about is some abstract idea, and you don't care about their sanctity and about their lives. That's the point. We can't demonize each other, and zealots demonize us.
Except, let's take the examples that you gave. I mean, one of the examples is there's a very famous conversation or correspondence between Gandhi and Martin Buber. And Gandhi says Jews should not have resisted, and they should have used nonviolence to resist the Nazis. And Buber's response is that works if your opponent is a culture with a conscience. That's how nonviolence works. Martin Luther King wanted national television coverage of Jim Clark's fire hoses and police dogs beating up and destroying demonstrators because it would move the conscience of the country, because you're dealing with an environment in which conscience is still alive. But if you're dealing with a Nazi government, then you need something different. Then you need something, a different kind of resistance. Let's take a different example. There's a very big argument among Zionists about whether the state of Israel would ever have existed if it hadn't been for the revisionists, for the Irgun and the Stern Gang. Right? Now, certainly the Haganah won in the end, and your process of reasoned negotiation took over. But the question is, does the nonviolent resistor, does the nonviolent protester need a violent resistor standing behind him in order to get the powers that be to pay attention to him? Did Martin Luther King need Malcolm X standing behind him in order for him to say, if you don't deal with me, you deal with him? And that's a legitimate question. So I'm not disagreeing with the basic premise, because zealotry scares us all. But the question is whether social change demands a little bit of insanity, a little bit of insane zealotry of some sort in order to make it more dangerous to stay with the status quo than it does to move to a new resolution and a new organization of power. Sherre, what did you want to add?
No, go ahead. I think there's this dilemma that we always think one way is the right way. And I really believe that we need change from within and we need change from without. And the toggle between them is what enables change to happen. The fact that the change makers from the inside, or the reason makers, don't like the zealots makes perfect sense. And the zealots that don't like the change makers from the inside also makes sense. So, but I would argue that you need them both, even though I'm not proud to say that, right? I would love to say that the world is made up of people that can reason themselves into change. I actually don't think it's true. I mean, look at that's a perfect example. If we could reason ourselves into an agreement in Israel, we would have it long ago. So my question is, maybe we need them both. Two parties that want that same goal. And I'm not sure that there's very many instances where we have that.
There is another story now that follows this one. And in some sense, right here in the Torah, we have the answer. In many ways, Rabbi Gellman is going to like this story much more. So in this story, and I'll put it up on the screen so that we can all take a look at the text itself, right? In this story, if I can find it, in this story, there are three women, and the three women are the children of a they are the children of a man named Zelophehad. They're the daughters. There are five of them, sorry. And the five daughters of Zelophehad come before Moses and they say, our father has died and he had no heir except us five daughters. And the inheritance rules that you have outlined only give property to the men. And that would mean that our father's inheritance would be dissipated into the tribe and his name would not be preserved upon the land. And the question is, can the rights of women be affirmed as heirs, and therefore can the inheritance laws be changed in order to accommodate the fact that there are daughters here instead of sons? And here's the text, right? Let not our father's name be lost just because he had no son. And what happens at this point is very interesting. So they don't protest. They don't burn anything. They don't kill anybody. Marc's going to love these women. They wait. And Moses goes to the tent of meeting and asks God, and God hands down the decision. Well, yes, they can inherit. It's the first expression of feminist rights in the Torah. And what's remarkable is that there's a juridical procedure. You go and check with the judge, and if the judge doesn't know the answer, he goes and checks with the Supreme Court, and we end up with a juridical decision that allows for these women to change the existing status quo and add something to the law. So, Marc, this is your moment. What's great about this?
Well, it's obvious what's great about it. It's the seeds of equal justice for women. This is the seeds of feminism in the middle of a patriarchy. This is an unbelievable thing. And I have unfortunately been cast in our discussions often by my own choosing. No one forced this on me, to talk about the bad parts of the Torah. I'm very sensitive to them, and the Pinchas stabbing of Kozi and Zimri is certainly one of them for me. But it's equally important to speak about the uplifting parts of the Torah, the eternal parts, the parts that give us a vision beyond the cultural limitations we are given. And the cultural limitations of the time of the Torah were that women didn't inherit. And that's because there was one man and several wives, and then his inheritance could get dissipated to different tribes depending on the wife. There were some reasons for it, but it was wrong and it was unjust. And their being given the right to inherit is not just about inheritance. In fact, it's not about that at all to me. What it is about the idea of, can the Torah change? Can it grow and change? And the key element that enables the Torah to change in the time of Moses in this story, which we don't have today, is a leader, an authority figure, a prophet, a lawgiver, who is so beyond reproach and so authoritative that his or her, it would be his generally, his rulings are accepted by everyone. We don't have that. So they had Moses, and when he said, this is the law God says, that's the end of it, because it's Moses talking. But when many of us said, well, a woman should be able to be a rabbi, or a woman should be able to read from the Torah, or be a member of a Beis Din, a rabbinical court, and Orthodoxy said, no, that's not our law, that's not the tradition. And we said, we understand it isn't, but the law can change. The law can grow. It can include them. And it's funny, because when I ask my conservative and Reform friends who love Orthodoxy, like I do, who love it, but who are not Orthodox, when I ask them, why are you not living an Orthodox life? All of them, the number one answer is, I want my daughter to have the same spiritual horizons as my son. That's it. It's the capacity of liberal Judaism, conservative, reconstructionist, Reform Judaism, to grant women equal spiritual horizons to men that constitutes the single reason not to be Orthodox. There's no other reason that counts for me in anywhere near this much, and this is the beginning of it all.
But did it take an act of zealotry? So here you have Zelophehad. You're right. They come very respectfully and somewhat obsequiously to Moshe and
But
say,
also, was that culturally mandated from them?
that's my question. That's my question.
And does it archetype women in a certain way that we've been battling with for years, that a woman can't be passionate and a zealot and argumentative? She's the one that goes through the procedures and is respectful and dutiful. I mean, I love the Daughters of Zelophehad. I'm concerned about what it sets up between the genders, between men and women, and how we're supposed to be fitting a certain narrow definition of women do this. They follow the procedures, they follow the rules, and then we get an entire tradition of women literally obedient to a male culture. So I love the Daughters of Zelophehad. Don't get me wrong. I love that story. First story I ever taught about mitzvah girl, and she lit up. She said, "This is in my Torah?" And I said, "Yes." And she couldn't believe it. So I have such profound, deeply emotional connection to the story. But what does it set up for women and men in general?
All right, so I have to ask you a very tough question. And again, I'm going to apologize, but you're the representative of the female half of humanity on the call. Did your mother ever tell you to be nice, to be quiet, to be demure? That's what girls are supposed to do. Did that ever happen to you growing up?
So the fact that you asked me that question in particular, Eddie, is fascinating. My mother never said that to me. She always said to me, be loud, be vocal. But her modeling was always passive, quiet, be nice. So what she said and what she did was very in conflict. And like every parent, we know that when those are in conflict, you follow what they do, right? And so I learned early on to follow my mother. And if my father challenged her, she shut down right away. The idea was that we acquiesced. And I would be lying if I didn't say there's a part of me that fights against that in my own family as a parent today. Because there's a part of me that sort of, it's like, why make waves? Let it go. Be easygoing. And yet every day I was the number 60th conservative woman rabbi. I've worked with men my whole career, and I can't be a shrinking violet. I don't think either of you see me as a shrinking violet, but it's hard not to confront that. And it's something I confront all the time.
I would like to say I don't see your characterization of the Daughters of Zelophehad that way. I see them as very bold, not obsequious in the least. They're saying, give us an inheritance in the community. Give us this inheritance. This is an affirmative, assertive group of women. And they've come to Moses. I guarantee you, no man came to Moses and said, hey, Moses, do this for me. No one talked to him.
No, because they just went and did, Pinchas went and did what he wanted. He didn't go and chat it over. He just went and
was wrong.
Put a sword for her.
But Pinchas was wrong. I don't support what Pinchas did. And the rabbis tried their best to undermine the moral authority of Pinchas, but they couldn't do it because it was in the Torah. And partly because Moses had also done an extra juridical thing by killing the taskmaster. So they had that problem too. But that's back at the other story. The point is, I think these daughters were very bold, and I don't think that their message is be obsequious to men. They went to Moses, they had a claim, they stated their claim forcefully, and they won. That's the key to it all. They won.
So maybe the message is for men. It's not the message about women. Maybe the message is men have to be ready and prepared for women to come forward and to hear that call. Because as much as it's hard for women to shift, I also think it's hard for men to shift.
Well, I don't think Moses was in the position of being the man. And so he was open, and he did bring it to God, and he did bring back a verdict which was in their favor. So I just think everything about this story is great, and I think their attitude is great. Now, did they change the patriarchy? That's a fair point you raised, Sherre, and I agree with you. No, they didn't. And did they change the relations between men and women, even down to our own parents? Back for me in the 50s, did they change that? No, they didn't change that either. But the 60s changed it, the 70s changed it, the 80s changed it, and we are in a new world now. But the issue in law, they call it stare decisis. That's the issue in American law, the Latin term, which means that they honor the precedents of the past. And that's the way that laws are, opportunities to change the law are judged against precedents. This is a statement that stare decisis does not work in the Torah, that there are new situations that arise and they require new laws. And one of the great mistakes that liberal Jews make is accepting the stereotype of liberal Judaism, that we just want to change things that are fixed, and we don't respect the past, and that Judaism doesn't change. It has fixed principles and fixed laws, and they never change. And this is the perfect example of how it does change. And at the very basis of it, at the time of Moshe, where it did change. So I think it's really God's gift. And maybe it was put in the Torah next to Pinchas to show precisely how change can occur. Not through the way of Pinchas, not through a sword through the belly, not through the Lehi and the Stern gang in Israel, but through the Haganah and Ben Gurion, who wanted to make alliances with England and with America, and who didn't want to blow up the King David Hotel. And through Martin Luther King, and not through Stokely Carmichael, and not through the Black Panthers, and not through those who preach violence. That there is a fundamental commitment that we have to change, but we also have a fundamental commitment against violence.
I'm not going to speak on behalf of violence, but I do want to add one more word on behalf of zealotry, though, because I do think I think there's something missing from the. I mean, it was a beautiful sermon, thank you, but in order to have what King did was open the door to civil rights, but there was another step. The African American, the Black community had to come to terms with itself. It had to come to terms with a sense of pride. Remember that in Memphis, when the garbage workers struck, which was King's last civil action, the signs they wore said, "I am a man." Black power was an important moment in the development of the African American cultural community because it gave people a sense of presence, that they were visible in the world. And that took something beyond simply the civil rights work of Martin Luther King. The same thing happens here with feminism. Again, I love what you said, and I appreciate the Benot Zelophehad. I certainly do. There's a dog.
He's chasing a coyote.
I know.
They have coyotes here. They eat Jews. They have Jew-eating coyotes here.
I appreciate Benot Zelophehad, and I appreciate the fact that the law changes and it opens, right? But there's two things about it. First of all, they shouldn't have had to come to ask to begin with, because the law was set up as a patriarchy to begin with. And of course, that's biblical patriarchy, and we've encountered that many times in the Bible. But the claim they have to make to Moses isn't, listen, we're members of the community and we have a right to inherit. The claim is our father's name will be lost in his clan. It's still a patriarchal claim. And it was to protect the father's name on the land and they were about to conquer, that the daughters were granted the inheritance. So once again, it's women begging for men to see them. They're invisible.
And sorry, go ahead, Eddie.
What I'm just suggesting is the piece that Marc hasn't commented on yet, the piece that Marc has left out is that for social revolution to happen, the first step is to make the social revolution visible and to make the status quo uncomfortable. And that, I'm afraid, and listen, I'm not advocating violence or the demonization of the other, but I'm afraid that that does require a spark of zealotry of some sort. Sherre, go ahead, and you'll have the last word on this one.
What I was just going to say was that you alluded to the fact, and commentators have written about this, that the women had to figure out and strategize what was the way that would work to get their law passed. And so the guise of their father was sort of a strategic move, because if they really had autonomy and power, they wouldn't have been asking permission. They would have just gone and had this, and we wouldn't be dealing with this 5,000 years later. So just well said, Eddie.
So one last piece of text before we finish today, and Marc's going to like this one especially. So for every Torah portion in the book, the rabbis of the Talmud assigned a haftarah, a section of the prophetic tradition that parallels it and forms a certain dialogue or commentary on it. And the haftarah for this week is this one. This is the story of Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi. Elijah. Now, Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, is identified by the tradition as, well, a zealot. He's a zealot for our side. He's a zealot for monotheism. And he lives in the time of a king named Ahab in the north of Israel. And Ahab, before he was a ship's captain in Melville, Ahab was a very, very powerful and in many ways very effective king, ruled for 45 years, brought security and prosperity to his people. And one of the ways he brought security and prosperity was that he married the princess of the Phoenicians who lived to the north of us. And her name, well, it's recorded in the Bible as Jezebel. Unlikely that's really her name, because Jezebel in Hebrew is Zevel, which means she's trash. Unlikely that's what her father and mother called her. But she brings all of the gods of her people into the capital and makes it a capital for idolatry. And Ahab then, despite his many accomplishments as a king of Israel, is accused by God and later by the Bible as having betrayed the traditions and the faithfulness of the covenant. And that's Elijah's zealotry. So here we have a zealot on our side. And there's a whole bunch of, there's 3 or 4 major stories about Elijah attacking the idolatry of Ahab's court and Ahab's people. And then Jezebel, who takes control of this, gets tired of him and wipes out all of his compatriots until he's the only monotheist left in the land. And what he does is he takes off for the desert to re-establish himself, to find his own place, to find his voice once again. He goes to the place where it all started, back to where we were before, back to Mount Sinai. And here's the story that's in the Haftarah. And I point this out because what's so interesting is that, as Marc pointed out, it's a really questionable morality of Pinchas. And here we have Elijah, also a zealot, but in a very different position, with a very different moral judgment. So he goes out into the desert, and he finds himself in a cave on Mount Sinai. And I want to take you down to about the middle of the text right here. Then the word of the Lord came to him and said, Elijah, why are you here? And he replied, I'm moved by zeal for the Lord, God of hosts, for Israel has forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left, and they're out to take my life. That's his complaint. I'm the only one left. I'm the only loyal one, and I'm in trouble. And God says, come outside. So he steps outside in front of the cave, and now comes this famous scene. God passed by in the same way that God passed by Moses. There was a wind that split mountains and shattered rocks, but God wasn't in the wind. An earthquake, and God wasn't in the earthquake. And a fire, and God wasn't in the fire. And then after the fire, the Hebrew is called the damama daka. It's translated here as a soft murmuring sound, but it's much deeper than that. Call means sound. Damama means silent. Daka means exquisite. The sound of an exquisite silence. That's where Gellman is today, up in the Aspen Mountains. The sound of exquisite silence. And when he heard it, Elijah heard it. He wrapped his mantle about his face. He didn't wrap himself in protection from the fire, the earthquake, or the wind. Only in the presence of that voice of silence does he wrap the mantle. And once again, the question is asked, Why are you here? And at this, Elijah says, once again, I'm a zealot. I have zeal for your faithfulness. And God says, go back and preach the word, brother. He's a different kind of zealot. He's not a violent zealot, it's true. But it takes a crazy man to move the status quo. And here you have Elijah the prophet, the zealot for the covenant. And the story is, it doesn't take the noise or the violence of the earthquake or the fire. It's the quiet voice within. Kol damama daka. Give me one word about this story, and then we'll conclude. Who'd like to start? Marc, you want to start?
Yeah, it's about be the change that you seek in the world. What we've been talking about today is one of the great divides between Eastern religions and Western religions. In the East, the idea is you change society by changing yourself, by becoming free of illusions and free of attachments, tanchakaya. You're not attached to things that aren't real. In the West, our view is we have to grab the world by the throat, and with zealotry and force and violence, we grab the world and we change it. And, I think the East has got it all over us on this. I think they have a more fundamental truth about change. And I think the change that King created, the change that Gandhi created, and the disaster that was created by zealots of violence on all sides of the political spectrum should teach us once again that it is our change, our internal change to eliminate our hatred of others and to eliminate our demonization of others and to try to seek with them a world in which we can all flourish. There isn't a talk about flourishing nowadays. There's talk about how the people on the other side are demons. And there is no good way from that. There is no emancipation from that. There is no freedom from that. There is no still small voice from that. Only fire, only earthquake, only despair.
Amen. So beautiful, Marc. I would just add that I think it's not a third alternative like you're suggesting, but rather in order to know the kind of, quote, zealotry or the methodology that you want to pursue, you have to get in line with God. And that's not going to be some outside voice telling you, do it this way. And we're such a culture that's focused on, this person said we should do it this way, let's follow him. And this guru said this, let's follow him. I think this messaging in the Elijah story is, what is that internal voice telling you that is authentic to you and how you should move forward to be an agent of change or to be a change maker, is to not let others lead that, but let your relationship with God lead that. So a compliment to what you said, Marc.
Thank you.
I appreciate both of you. This was wonderful today. Thank you. The still small voice, the quiet murmuring sound, the deep, exquisite silence that one finds in these very precious moments of life is something that the Torah, the Bible, is turning us toward. And I think it's wonderful that the rabbis assigned this Haftorah, because as Sherre said so nicely and as Marc has articulated so powerfully, the voices of the zealots who carry the spears and who scream at us, they may have a place, and we can debate the place they have in the social structure, but it has to be followed with a moment of deep and quiet introspection, and to ask that voice, why are you here? What are you trying to accomplish? What is really most important to you? What is the essence of the message? And I think, if anything, this moment of history requires us to do that as well. Thank you both. It's great to have you back. Sherre, welcome back from vacation. Marc, continue your travels and best of luck with your move. And to everyone who's watching, following our broadcast, of course, at 10 o'clock, you're welcome to join us for Shabbos davening, Shabbos prayers. Cantor Phil and I will be here. And then at 11:30, our friend Rabbi Hillel Silverman has a few words to share on this week's Parsha. Tonight at 8:30, Havdalah. And Havdalah, actually, the service Havdalah is tonight, and then every Shabbos the same time. Torah study at 9, service at 10, followed by Havdalah in the morning. Minyan on Sunday morning at 8:30. Minyan on weekdays at 7:30. Minyan every evening at 6 o'clock. I'm going to wish you Shabbat Shalom, a peaceful and a quiet and a good Shabbos. Take good care.
Good Shabbos.